Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to today's session, a guide to incident response framework, data mining, and managed review. I'm Shilpa Goswami, and I'll be your host for the day. Before we get started, we would like to go over a few house rules. For our attendees, the session will be in listen only mode and will last for an hour, out of which last 15 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. If you have any questions during the webinar to organizer or our speaker, please use the Q&A window. Also, if you face any audio video challenges, please check your internet connections or you may log out and log in again. Now about our speaker, Eder Ribeiro. Eder graduated from Roger Williams University School of Law, earning his Juris Doctor. He has also earned a Master of Science in Cybersecurity. He has led TransUnion's incident response forensic team over that last 6 years. In his leading from the front style, Eder has led the IRF team through thousands of cases ranging from unauthorized cryptocurrency, mining, ransomware, business email compromises, and much more. Eder also has 16 years of experience in the United States Rhode Island Army National Guard, where he led troops as a team leader on a combat deployment in the Kandahar Province in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. Eder is a certified mediator and performed duties at the state headquarters level. Eder expertise includes solution product creation, program development and expansion, threat assessment, risk mitigation, security process improvement, privacy compliance, and contract drafting. He has worked over 1,000 organizations in his current capacity, helping them determine and react to the nature of their security incident breaches and determining the best course of action to recover to safe operations and meet compliance obligation. Without any further delay, I would hand over the session to you, Eder.
Thank you, Shilpa. It is much appreciated. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and welcome to our fifth five out of five, our fifth series episode in this series. Thrilled to have you all here and to be here. Um, I hope that many of you are return attendees from our previous sessions. This will be helpful for you if you have attended the previous sessions, and as these sessions are designed to work flow and work together. However, they are also designed to have a beginning, middle, and end, so you won't be lost at any point here if you did not attend the previous sessions. Okay. So I want to get right into it. There's a lot about this topic to talk about. There's a lot of nuances here. This is an overview of this process, so you're not going to come out of here, being an expert in any way, for sure, in any way about data mining or managed review, or knowing exactly to the most technical or granular level how it is performed or how it's done. So the focus here really is to shine a light on this very important part of an incident, which happens very frequently nowadays, and it can be a very burdensome part of the incident for multiple reasons, which we will touch on. So yeah, we find that in our experience dealing with other folks in the industry and dealing with MSSPs and other types of security professionals outside of the forensic landscape, that this is one topic where most of the time people don't know much about, if anything, really. And that can cause not only delays in cases, but that can cause frustrations all around because folks aren't always speaking the same language. So even though as a security practitioner, it's unlikely that you yourself will be doing this work, it is important that you understand why it's being done, what it is, what are the impacts, and what should you do, and what is your role as a practitioner here. Okay, so that's what we're hoping to do. We're hoping to cover, what is data mining or DM, or, what is managed review. By the way, it's also commonly referred to as manual review because of it's heavily a manual like process. So a lot of folks refer to it as manual review. So if I accidentally use that term interchangeably between manual and managed, just know that it's essentially the same thing, okay? But they are commonly used in the field, both words. So we're going to hit on all these subjects as we spoke about, and then hopefully there'll be some time for Q&A, and we can address any of your questions or concerns. So what is data mining? I want to put this in a simple way that's easy to ingest. So data mining is a process where we take a data set. That data set could be any kind of data. It could be, a folder. It could be, a mix of different folders. It could be an entire partition in, a data partition from a hard drive. It could be a set of data that's online being hosted on a web portal somewhere, which is often what becomes the target of a data mining situation. I'll touch on that later. It can be a mailbox, and like an email account. It could be many things, but essentially, this is where you take a data set, and some forensic techniques are used in conjunction with software work to perform what is essentially programmatic extraction, that identifies or flags what documents or what specific sources of information within that data set, usually, it'll be an individualized document, is positive for a specific searched term, okay? The search term, you could search almost anything. Some things make sense to search more than others. Some things don't make sense to search at all, right? You don't want search terms that are overly broad, because otherwise it'll defeat the purpose of data mining, which is to narrow, your understanding of, if I'm looking at 1,000 documents, how many documents contain X information that I'm looking for. If you go too broad, then every document is going to be a hit, and then it defeats the purpose of the mining. So you need to keep that in mind when you're talking to a data mining vendor, or when you're involved in a data mining situation, as to search terms do matter, okay, and which is often why in this industry, at least in our reactive incident response realm, you will find that search terms are usually tied to what is defined as personal information or personally identifiable information, PI or PII. Again, those terms are also used interchangeably. There's usually a legal definition for that. Okay, this isn't a legal course, so I'm not going to go really into that at all. This is why you will see through this presentation, through this webinar, that this is often a piece of the incident that's led not by the security people, but by the privacy and legal counsel. This is usually something led by the lawyers for that reason, because it's very focused on identifying usually what is PII or what is not PII, because this is happening with the ultimate goal that it aids in the final piece of many incidents, which is breach notification or breach fulfillment, which is essentially the actual mailing of letters and credit monitoring codes and that kind of protection to individuals whose information was impacted during the cyber incident. This is how you get there. This is part of how you get to that very last piece of an incident. And because of that, it's a very important piece of IR that goes often undiscussed along security professionals. So that's essentially what the data mining piece is. It's searching for specific things, and most of the time it's going to be PII, PHI, some other form of search terms. Okay, managed review or manual review, as I mentioned, is what happens after that first phase. That's the actual mining of the PII. Once the mining is complete, you now have a sub data set or a new data set from your original, however many documents that may be. And that data set or sub data set is now the scope of that second phase of the review. Okay, so once you say, for example, you have a 10,000 document data set, and you mine that data set, and now say 50% of the documents were hit, so you have 5,000 documents left that need to go into review. Now that is the new scope of work, and under that new scope of work, a review team is then going to go through the process of looking into those documents to identify who are the actual humans whose information is within those documents, and then extracting that information to form an ultimately a deliverable. Okay, so that's essentially managed review or manual review in a nutshell. And again, we're going to go into details into each of those as we progress here. So when does data mining happen? And when does manual review and data mining happen within the IR lifecycle? This is where it becomes definitely a callback through the previous episodes in this series. This specific graphic is one you've seen in every single episode of the series if you are a previous attendee, because this is the life cycle, the classic IR life cycle. Data mining can happen anytime, really, and it usually happens either during the detection / analysis, but really during the analysis phase, and during the recovery phase, not necessarily doing containment and eradication, although there's a reason why those two are revolving around each other, because it is cyclical and they are often happening at the same time, especially with larger, more complex organizations where their data could be all over the place. The system configurations can be very complex, which then results in a need to do many things all at once in order to be most efficient. Where if you're looking at a micro business, something, a single physical server, a handful of workstations, think of your, mom and pop business, your CPAs, or, your local stores and things of that sort. It's a lot easier to take things in very rigid phases in that IR lifecycle, because accomplishing each phase is so much faster, simply because the scope of work is so much smaller. So data mining in those cases almost exclusively happen during the end of analysis around recovery time. Okay, so towards the end of the incident, that's when you're going to see data mining happen. The vast majority of the time, it's going to be towards the end of the incident, on when the client, victim, whatever you want to call the person you're perhaps your own organization is about to go into post-incident activity. Okay, so this is going to be one of those final phases. From there, let's talk about how this works, right? We already started talking about this, just doing the overview and the definitions that I wanted to give you for context before going into this heavier part here. It all starts with identifying data. You have to identify essentially the data set. What is the data set? What is that? Why is it that we need to do this work? So that all surrounds the idea of identification of the data. If you have, say, an email account, okay, well, we have an email account. That's part of the identification. But this requires talking to people and to the user on that email account, perhaps doing some manual searching, looking through actual emails, looking through folders, trying to gain an understanding, if you don't already know, based on your business operational principles, what kind of information is here? Is this now the kind of information that when we report it to counsel is going to say, oh, okay, this is sensitive data. This is going to trigger, some potential issues here. We are now going to have to recommend that you undertake data mining as the next step, because the evidence from the forensics and the analysis, or sometimes it can be empirical evidence, such as ransomware scenario, right, where a threat actor leaks exfiltrated data to their blog. It's very common that we, as the security professionals, will retrieve or download some of that data from blogs, and data mining that occurs on that data. That's fairly common. Of course, that's going to be case by case dependent, whether that's going to happen, whether that's not going to happen. It is ultimately usually a decision left to counsel on whether that retrieval of data will happen, for a multitude of reasons. Again, I'm not going to go into those, even though there's a lot of information there, but it's a bit outside the scope of this conversation, as that is very much so more of a legal topic. So you as a security professional, you are going to be likely working under the privacy and legal professional in this capacity. and you will be there to assist in identifying what this data set is, whether it's to pull samples of the data, whether it's to guide that legal entity through what the data looks like, so they can be in the best position to make an informed decision about, all right, well, this is what we need to gather to make the scope. And that goes into, it's a perfect segue, talking about gathering, into the aggregation of the actual data. You need to have the data in one place. Data mining is something that requires the data to be extracted from where it is and in right now to the team, to where the team that's going to do the data mining needs that data to be at, which is going to be hosted on their side temporarily, so they can run the appropriate work on that data set. That means that you, as a security professional, will likely have a strong role here in aggregating that data, whether that's downloading it from a leak site, whether that is pulling multiple folders from a user's endpoint, whether that is moving data from a server, whether it's a combo of all those things. It could be any of that. But data aggregation is a critical step here, as of course you can't do the work on the data if you don't get the data in one place, and usually in one chunk. Okay, then data collection will happen. That's usually going to be nowadays done remotely, as it is for most things. Usually some sort of upload to a secured SFTP of some sort that will happen between you, the legal professional who may, the security professional who may be assisting in this effort. And of course, if you're an external professional, if you're not part of the organization who is suffering the incident, and you're not the one involved in uploading that data to the data mining vendor, then you will be the one pulling that data from the incident, the organization that had the incident. Okay, so you need to also think about that as a security professional, because you have to take into account, when it comes to data collection, what kind of encryption are you using for this data as it goes in transit? When you collect this data, it has to be in a secured space, especially because it's usually very sensitive data. So how are you securing the place where you are storing this data? You also have to take into account, especially as the data sets grow larger and larger, how are you going to get this data? Because sometimes bandwidth and upload speeds can really cause havoc here. So you may, depending on your situation, data collection could become something where data has to be encrypted and at rest to then be placed in a hard drive of some sort of external medium and physically sent to the data mining entity. That does happen every once in a while. So, we've seen all sorts of stuff be used in that process, whether it's just encryption being placed and then putting it in some sort of like external, USB drive and being shipped, whether you're using something like a managed service for that kind of collection, think of, AWS Snow Cone or something of that sort. That's all stuff that we've used to collect data for data mining purposes. And it can be quite necessary once the data mining starts crossing into the half terabytes and the terabytes and the multiple terabytes, because at that point, uploading that much data can be a real hassle for a lot of folks. Once that data is received, then data mining occurs, and you go through that whole process, which we're going to cover in detail very shortly. And then, as we mentioned in the overview, data mining is going to produce a result. That result, also, there's a bit of work that happens in between that result that's aimed at essentially minimizing or lowering the document count or the amount of data that's in that new data set before it goes into review, because again, the review relies a lot on humans, and that can be large teams of people. And that's partially why it's so costly, and we'll cover that in a little bit as well. But there's a lot of work that you might have to assist counsel or whoever it is that you are dealing with, who's leading the privacy front, in doing to narrow down that scope of review as much as possible. So there is a bunch that happens, kind of after the mining itself, but before the review. Okay, and then of course the review is going to create an output. It's going to create deliverables that will be provided to, one, for sure, the privacy expert, the legal counsel who will be leading the front here, but then it'll be provided to whatever team is doing the actual breach fulfillment, the mailing of letters or emails, however it is that you're notifying people. Okay, so those are the normal deliverables in this two-phased approach that you will see across the board, and that's going to be regardless of vendor. It doesn't matter, if you're dealing with TransUnion, it doesn't matter if you're dealing with anyone else out there in the space who provides these services. In the end of the day, you're going to get this pretty much the same deliverables. Of course, that they'll change in format and the look of it, but essentially you're going to get about the same thing in the end of it, which is pretty consistent across the industry. So you might be thinking, well, a lot of this, mentioned legal counsel a lot and privacy professionals a lot. Well, what's my role, right? Because it doesn't sound like there's much of a role for a cybersecurity professional here. And in a way, you're right. This is probably one of the lightest loads work-wise for the cyber professional. And when you think about it, your work is up front for pretty much the entire IR phase until you get to this point. Here, you're really more in a support role. So this is not formally, an investigative in nature or forensic in nature process, but it has traces in the concept, and you are critical in the aggregation, identification, collection, and support roles for this function. Okay, so it's important that you don't check out as a security professional once it gets to this point. We see that far too often, and that can have negative impacts on the organization because you are going to be needed. And it's very important that you understand that, because you don't want to just say, okay, well, my part is done, and then you go away, and then when you come back to the incident when somebody's saying, hey, we need you to get involved here again for whatever reason, you don't know what's going on anymore. Okay, so again, early phase, your involvement is scattered across this entire piece, but it's really going to be primarily occurring during the early phase, which is on the data mining side more than anything. The pain points, right? Let's talk about that a bit. All of this can create massive costs, all right? One would often, you would be surprised if you are not exposed to this kind of work, you would be surprised how expensive this stuff can get. And that creates major problems. One, because, often organizations may have cyber insurance or may not have cyber insurance. If they have cyber insurance, this is one of the leading ways in how insurance policies are maxed, or if not even, exceeded is the best word I think to use. It's not uncommon, especially in the micro to SME type of organization, small, medium entities, where the business may have a small amount of insurance because that's what the business leads can afford, or what they thought was reasonable for them based on their, at the time, understanding of their cyber risk exposure. And they may have an investigation that may take 30% or 40%, possibly, of the face value of what's available to them under their cyber insurance. And they think, okay, well, we're going to be done here. But now the evidence says, well, this data set was exfiltrated, or this data set was compromised by a threat actor. And you have your legal counsel saying, well, you have this, you told us you have this data here. So now we have to undertake the data mining part of this event and go through this process. And you go through that process that we outlined, here, of the identification, the aggregation, the collection. And now this goes into a data mining lab, right? Now at this point, they are going to do what is the most forensic part of this, which is essentially removing forensic digital duplicates or forensic duplicates out of the data set, often done through hashing. And then they're going to use some sort of data mining platform. So this is going to be a piece of software of some point, of some kind. All right. And that's what's going to do that programmatic piece of the extraction. And that software will have loaded the search terms and what it is that you're looking for, which is something you, the security professional, may be working to liaise that information between yourself and the data mining vendor and counsel, And if you are on the side where you're working in a defer shop that offers this kind of service, you may be just being the one dealing with counsel directly on what these search terms are and what they are not going to be. So you're the one that's going to be doing this work. Now, this is often driven cost-wise based on the amount of data, so megabytes, gigabytes, terabytes, and that's going to fluctuate across the industry as far as how much you're paying per gig or per TB or per whatever. But this can very quickly get a little bit out of control. So which again, I'll go back to the slide to overemphasize on those first two bullets, the data identification and the aggregation. There's a lot of time should be spent here to try to really understand what is, absolutely needed for mining and what is not needed for mining, as that will have an impact, a direct impact on costs. Okay. From there, and just keep in mind, I hope to not confuse anyone, but I will be going back and forth to those two slides because I want you to understand the pain points and then understand where it fits in the actual timeline, or for lack of better terms, or order of events for data mining and review. So from there, data mining will occur. You will have an understanding of, okay, under that hypothetical that I provided earlier of the 10,000 documents, if you have a 50% hit rate, and now we have 5,000 documents, well, how many documents are positive, say, for social security numbers, or how many documents are positive for passport numbers or date of birth type information? Or, if you're dealing with an educational entity like a college, you may be having to put specific educational search terms that fall under specific legal guidance. That could be donor information, that could be student IDs. You will see a plethora of search terms that you as a security practitioner likely never heard of until you get involved in this sort of work. And again, to emphasize, this is where why counsel needs to lead these fronts, because this is all going to be compliance driven. Okay. But as you can imagine, as you're looking at all this data, and you're thinking, okay, well, now we're going, and what's coming up next, you have to review these documents. You can think about how this is going to affect costs. I think that's kind of an obvious really here. So costs are going to be really one of the biggest concerns for the company that had the incident occur, because most companies don't have infinite resources, and certainly no company wants to spend more than they have to with a cyber incident, and this is the place where things are going to get out of hand. At the end of the mining piece, as we mentioned, you're going to get the results of what the breakdown of the types of PI that were hit. And at this point, you as the security professional, how to manipulate data and move data back and forth in a secured fashion. So you will also be involved in this part where it comes to drawing samples that counsel may want. Counsel may say, well, I see 8,000 hits, or 800 hits for this in this 5,000 hit series. I'm not exactly sure what kind of information is there. So let's pull a sample of X amount of documents. So you're going to have to either work with your vendor, or if you're in the defer shop and you folks are offering this kind of work, you're going to have to go into that data set and do a sample extraction of a specific type of data, and then securely make that available to the legal professional who's leading the front here. Okay. So again, as a security practitioner, you will have a role in this piece of it as well. And this whole piece that's kind of vetting and probing into post data mining data is all usually done with the focus of lowering that scope of review. Okay, the review really is where the cost hit comes into, more often than not, because it's incredibly time consuming, and therefore the hourly charges start to really climb up. It's not uncommon for us to see a single mailbox of 20 gigabytes, which is nothing crazy when you really think about how much data that is, require hundreds upon hundreds of hours to review the data set at the review phase. And even regardless of where the review is happening onshore, whether that's here US onshore or Canada or or Europe, wherever it is that onshore is for you, or whether it's happening in a location where you would call offshore, which is often somewhere else in the world where the labor costs and other costs to host data might be a little friendlier from a budgetary perspective. Regardless of where it's happening, if you're doing hundreds upon hundreds of hours of work, that's going to get expensive. Okay, so can't really overemphasize how painful that cost can be. We have dealt with many matters in the past where you have, a $40,000 or $50,000 investigation, but then the review piece alone is more than, it's well into the six figures, just to give you an idea of how astronomical some of these costs can get. And even in the like small business, even in the micro business, again, think a 5-person CPA business or something of that sort. We have seen investigations that cost as little as $10,000 or $15,000 for the actual forensics and remediation and recovery, and most of that was IR phases. But then you get to the mining and review, and you're looking at $60,000 worth of work. That can be so detrimental to a small business. If you folks think about this, most businesses can't handle that kind of out-of-pocket expense. So they are heavily reliant on insurance for this kind of thing. And again, a lot of businesses are underinsured for this kind of cost. So then that can create issues regarding their ability to cover the payments for this. So this can be very painful. Okay. The other things that you see here in pain points is timeline. Data mining is usually fairly quick. It's programmatic, right? It's a lot of software. So as long as you, the security professional, if you're doing this work or your vendor, make sure that they have the right amount of compute so they can actually chew through a large data set in a time efficient manner. You will see a lot of vendors, have to heavily invest in compute and processing power in order to do this kind of work, which can, of course, have its cost in itself, and that can also inflate the cost of data mining, right? Because folks have to apply so much processing and so much compute power to go through this work. But then the review piece comes in. If you have 5,000 documents to review, it's simply going to take a lot longer if you have 6 people reviewing it versus having 60 people reviewing it. That's a no-brainer. But of course, the more people you add to something, then it's higher payroll. It's more time you're spending paying folks to do that work. And even though the overall, maybe it'll take, say, again, just for easy math purposes, 100 hours to review that 5,000 documents. Well, 100 hours may be, is the overall cost. So to the organization facing the incident, sure, you're still paying for 100 hours, 100 hours, 100 hours, whether you have 6 people or 60 people, and that's of course going to impact the speed of review. But if you're the one, if you're the security practitioner who's on the DFIR side and you're the one having to pay for the staff comes with all sorts of other, costs that aren't just base pay, and that can really escalate your costs as well on this. And and so you will find where, as a security professional, when you're either the one doing this work or when you're working with a vendor on this, the timeline will greatly fluctuate because all these principles, all this context I just gave you, ultimately leads to the folks doing the data mining and the review to only be able to allocate a certain amount of resources for your individual case. And that can have a major impact on timeline. Additionally, regarding timeline, that may be a problem here, and this is going to come from counsel, is going to be that you may be running upon regulatory deadlines. So now you may have to start reporting to the government, or to, you may have to start notifications or whatever it is. Again, take your lead from counsel on this, but whatever that deadline may be, you may have 5 weeks, but you're looking at 80,000 documents that need to be reviewed, or 200,000 documents that need to be reviewed. That's going to be a very tight timeline. if you're talking hundreds of thousands of documents, regardless of of team size, that's going to be a pretty tight deadline, because a lot of work happens during the review. It's not just loading the data in a review platform, letting the review platform auto understand some of the data, and then having humans look at every single document individually and write down the person's information. That is what's happening during first level of review. Absolutely. But you still have what happens after the first level of review. It's obvious that at some point people are looking through the data set, but you have to validate that those humans didn't make errors. You have to, think that because you have multiple people working a data set, you are randomly breaking the data set into, X number of documents, into batches that are going to either be X number of documents or are going to be X megabytes or gigabytes per reviewer, which means the reviewer inherently will likely come across PII, multiple reviewers will come across personal information of the same person, which then means that after the review phase, you have to go through this often very long, multiple days phase of QA of work, right, of quality assurance work, where you have to deduplicate this data, you have to merge records. You might have, think of a CPA who has their email account compromised. You quite often are going to find PII for a lot of the same people in that mailbox. And it may be because that person sent multiple documents that have the same personal information for them. It may be multiple years of them sending those documents. So if you have a 10 review team, it could be that 8 reviewers are seeing the information for that one individual. So 8 reviewers are going to write down John Smith and John Smith's social security number. But you have to be able to ultimately merge all of that, those John Smiths into one. Otherwise, you're giving counsel a deliverable that has 8 rows in Excel for the same person, and that's just going to create a nightmare when it comes time to notify those individuals. You don't want to have to accidentally send the same person 8 letters, and so there's a lot that can go wrong here. So that QA phase is very critical, where this merge deduplication work is happening, where looking over the reviewer's work and everything else is happening in order to ensure that the work was done accurately. And of course, this is all to mitigate, often to mitigate some sort of privacy risk or some sort of legal burden. So this work is going towards curing that. But that's where the accuracy of this work is also very critical. If this work is rushed through or not done in a consistent and proper manner, your risk mitigation efforts may be now getting really out of whack, because you might skip something, you may miss information, and that can have a really detrimental effect on the overall compliance for the organization as they are trying to climb out of the incident that they just underwent. So that's really it in a shell, folks. In summary, you're likely doing this under the guidance of counsel. You're likely doing this because a specific type of information was compromised, and it's now a requirement that you need to understand whose information was compromised, so counsel can assist you, your company, or or the company you are providing services for. If you're on the DFIR side and you offer this kind of service, you're looking to help folks mitigate a risk that comes from a potential regulatory burden, whether that's through statute or whatever it is that may be. But make sure that you are, working directly with the people who have the proper privacy knowledge, which is going to be your legal counsel, on what to do here. You as the security professional are here to support more than anything. You do play an important role in this, although you are not the one leading this work. And I can't really overemphasize that, because a lot of times that concept gets lost when we see folks in the field hit this stage of an incident. I hope that you found this valuable. I hope that this makes sense now that when you're thinking about how this is happening in the end of an incident, usually. when we already spoke in previous episodes about ransomware negotiations and about business email compromises and about just the overall IR cycle. This, because of the cost, the timeline, all those pain points that we talked about, the risks that you're looking to mitigate through this should be something that you consider when it comes to your incident response plans. If you come upon the need to do data mining, do you have the financial resources? Who besides the security professional who's there to move data around, who is going to be in charge of dealing with the other stakeholders? Who's even going to bring in those essential stakeholders, such as legal counsel? That should all be in your incident response plans, which is what we covered on our last session. So make sure that you incorporate all of these concepts into each one of those IR life cycles. And if you do so, you will find yourself as a more well-rounded security professional, and you will find yourself in a position to really be more effective and to best support the organization in their time of need. All right. I want to again thank you for your time. This has been an absolute pleasure. I hope to be able to have the opportunity to do more work with EC Council and bring some more of this type of information to you folks. I wish you all the best of luck, and curious to see what questions you have. And I will absolutely be active in the EC Council Cyber Leaders Reddit page after the session and for the following days to address any questions regarding any of the subjects that we covered over the 5 episodes of the series. Thank you very much. Shilpa, back to you.
Thank you so much, Eder. Thank you for delivering such an insightful and informative session. We found the webinar very engaging and hope it was valuable for you as well. Now, before we begin with the Q&A, I would like to inform all the attendees that EC Council Certified Incident Handler maps to Incident Handler or Incident Manager role. Anyone with an ECIH certification is eligible for 17,000 plus jobs on LinkedIn globally with an average salary of $73,676. If you're interested to learn more about our program, kindly take part in the poll that's going to be conducted now. Let us know your preferred mode of training and we will reach out to you soon. So, Eder, shall we start with the Q&A?
Absolutely.
Eder? Yeah.
I'm there.
Okay. Yeah. So, our first question to you is, could you recommend training resources for learning DM and MR skills?
Yes, but it is limited, I will say. You can find written resources, you can find some information online about this process. You will likely have to start also searching for who the players are in the market, meaning like who's providing these services, and from there start doing a deeper dive into the platforms that they will use. And you will see across some pretty common names. Like I'll give you the 2 most common tools that are used in this process, which I would say from a review perspective and mining perspective are a Relativity and another one called Canopy. Those are the most common ones you're going to see in the field. So you can look up these tools, but a lot of this is learned on the job. I'd never heard of any like educational facility that does training on data mining or review. This is heavily industry led.
Thank you, Eder, for answering that question. Next question to you is, to what extent can data mining be automated in the incident response process?
The mining itself is pretty automated, right? Once the data gets loaded into the platform, and you already extracted the digital duplicates, which is usually done through scripting, batching, and things of that sort, which is in itself fairly automated, then the software is doing a lot of the work. So that piece is pretty automated already as is. Now, how to automate? Now, I'm not sure if you're question is how to automate mining as part of your process, there is something that's referred to as data mapping, which is, from a technical perspective, essentially data mining. And it's just that it's more, that terminology is mostly used on the proactive side, not on the reactive side. And that's the undertaking of periodically essentially data mining your data so you can understand where your sensitive information is. And that's usually done with the goal of removing that information from that area, or moving it to a more secured location there where it may be, or completely just deleting that data, eradicating that data, so you just eliminate the risk scope altogether. We often recommend, you heard me give examples of CPAs, for example. We do a lot of work with CPAs because they're heavily targeted and they hold a lot of your personal information here in the US, right? Because they're your tax professionals. So they hold your social security number, date of birth, and all this kind of information that's highly sensitive. I can't tell you how many times I just have to tell every single CPA that comes across our workbench, just make it a policy to don't keep sensitive information in your email. Delete that, right? Why you don't need it. There's no reason why you need that information in your email. So often that does lead into a recommendation that you should undertake some sort of, if you can't set it up as a matter of process, as a standard operating procedure or an SOP, to try to data mine or eliminate the data manually before it becomes a larger data set within your, say, for example, email account, then it is often recommended that you build data mining into your proactive security measures. So you are, a few times a year, or at least once a year, identifying where all your sensitive data is so you can eradicate that data. Hope that addresses your question.
Thank you, Eder, for answering that question. Next question to you is, what specific data mining techniques are most effective for identifying relevant evidence in different types of security incidents? Example, ransomware attacks, data breaches.
Can you reread that one more time for me, Shilpa? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. What specific data mining, what specific data mining techniques are most effective for identifying relevant evidence in different types of security incidents? Example, ransomware attacks, data breaches.
Okay, so you would, again, ideally, you would be undertaking some sort of data mining or data mapping before you have an incident, so you can understand where your sensitive data is and you can actually do something about it before you're mandated to do something about it. That's best case scenario. That's, the best world. Although that's not often reality, especially in the micro to SME space, due to budgetary constraints, due to, many unfortunate myths that are still out there of the whole, I'm too small to get hit, so I don't have to worry about data exposure. That kind of thing is still very prevalent in the market. So ideally, you want to do this stuff before there's a true incident. When there is an incident, as far as a technique, there's not really necessarily like a specific technique, I would say. What I would say the most effective thing is, you need to have a very clear understanding of where your data is and what kind of data you're hosting where, everywhere on your network. That way, what chunks of network may actually require some sort of data mining effort if that chunk of network ends up becoming compromised. That's really the best, I would say, technique. Now, I will throw this one thing out there with the ransomware that can be very complicated. Ransomware encrypts data. That's what ransomware is, as we've spoken about. And if you're not familiar with ransomware, please go back to our previous sessions. We cover ransomware in pretty good detail. In our second session, we even spent the entire session talking about ransomware negotiations and talked in depth about that entire process. Well, your data is encrypted. If you don't have backups, if you find yourself in a situation where your backups were compromised, or you just didn't have backups for whatever one of the myriad of reasons that people have to why they ended up not having backups, you're going to not be able to data mine. You can't data mine something that's encrypted. The mining software can't read it. It's encrypted. So you need to remember that you can only data mine data that's in plain text. And that can also create a nightmare for your legal counsel, because if you have a ransomware incident and you as the practitioner knows that your company keeps sensitive data in this specific data partition in that specific server, but that server is now encrypted and the data is encrypted and your backups are encrypted, then how do you achieve the understanding of whose information was compromised? Fortunately for you as the security practitioner, that nightmare is really councils to mitigate and manage, but it really puts them in a tough position, and that's not where we want our friends, over on the legal side of the house, to be. We don't want anyone to be in a tough position. So you as a security professional should be thinking about, if we have to have sensitive information because of what we do for a living, one, how do we protect it? But how do we also ensure that if this data does become compromised, that we actually are able to search through this data, so we can do what needs to be done? So that's really the key takeaways you want to take from that line of thinking there that the question is based on. Next question.
Thank you so much, Eder, for answering that question. We'll take last question for the day. What kind of changes do you think we should expect as we allow AI to be integrated in IR?
Okay. When it comes to this, more, there's already some AI technology in some of the managed review platforms and the data mining platforms. That's already happening. I'm not going to go make, specific name which ones are using AI and which ones are not using AI, because I don't want to come off as an endorsement of any kind. So I will omit that. But know that Gen AI technology is being used in the data mining softwares and managed review softwares. And the review side, the focus is in, just so you understand why, in the data mining side is because the AI is better at reading the data and aggregating the data. On the review side, the AI is better at merging the data, at deduplicating the data, and just understanding the overall data set. So if you have a data set that's friendly to your review platform, AI is going to be able to, much quicker than a human, say, oh, yes, here are the 10 documents for John Smith. This is the information for John Smith. I'm going to already put it all together so you know exactly what documents are here for John Smith, exactly what data is here for John Smith, and here it is in the format that you want. It's fantastic. But you also need to make sure, like all things, especially in this area, all things AI, especially where we are in the world right now, where the AI technology is, you need to make sure that the AI is actually doing the right thing and that the AI is doing it correctly and that it's not making stuff up. To say, oh, this looks like John's information, so I'm just going to say that it's John's information. So you have to check that AI, but it's very much so already being in use to help ease that burden of the timeline concerns that review and data mining create for the organization, which of course also means it impacts cost positively, because you're saving a lot of time that humans are doing the work, which can again be very costly. So that's where AI is happening. On the other side of it, I haven't seen much of this yet, so I'm gonna speculate here, and this might be a prediction that I truly hope does not come to fruition, which is threat actors creating or using some sort of AI tool to to become faster at identifying where sensitive information is in a network, and then exfiltrating that information at the same time using that AI tool. I really hope that doesn't happen. It probably will, but just when you think about why threat actors do what they do and how threat actors make a living and how they make money, right? it's what these folks do for a living, is to be a cyber criminal, and they're selling data. That's why they're often hitting a network, whether it's to encrypt it and hold you hostage, under an extortion scheme, aka ransomware, or whether it's to just get in your network and steal your data so they can sell that sensitive data to another threat actor who's then going to pay for that data so they can steal people's identities. So, I can see how it's going to get used in that space sooner than later. I hope it's later, but that's where AI is when it comes to this specific type of work.
Thank you again to our wonderful speaker, Eder, for answering those questions and for the great presentation and knowledge shared with our global audiences. It was really a pleasure to have you with us, and we are looking for more and more sessions with you. Now, before we conclude the webinar, Eder, would you like to give a small message to our audience?
I just want to again reiterate my gratitude and appreciation for all of you that have showed up for every one of these sessions, and for those that attended just today, thank you. It's a pleasure to get this information out there. It's a privilege to be in a position to be able to get this information out there and to help the current and future practitioners in our field. I love what we do. I think it's one of the most important things that can be done nowadays. And, I want to commend you all for taking this journey into cybersecurity. And again, just thank you. It's incredibly important that there are more and more people in the world doing what we're doing as our species just continues to become more and more technological. So thank you all for the opportunity, and I hope to see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eder.